ਵਾਹਿਗੁਰੂ ਜੀ ਕਾ ਖਾਲਸਾ ਵਾਹਿਗੁਰੂ ji ki fateh. Welcome to this segment of Code Gurbani's a-sabad-a-day. Today is the 30th stanza, or sabad if you will, from Asa Kabir Jiyo, compositions of Kabir Ji in the rag Asa. And this one is on page 483. In this passage, in this Shabad, Kabir Ji begins with what appears to be a complaint of sorts, or at least describing the present state of things. Because he says, Kio Singar Milan ke tain, har na mile jag jeevan gosain. Kio Singar. Singar, makeup, adornment, embellishment. Typically, when a bride-to-be is preparing for her marriage, she does what is called a singar, and it is a very elaborate and skillful art. Skills, if you will, 16 singar, 16 skills. The point being that Kabir Ji is using a feminine trope here to say that I, the bride soul, have been embellishing myself milan ke tain. Milan in everyday parlance means to meet, to unite. So the obvious meaning here is that I've been preparing myself to meet the heart, to meet myself for that union, which is the context of Gurmat. But he's saying, Har na mila jag jeevan gosain. So this is interesting. He's saying, but I have failed to attract jag jeevan gosain. So the word milan is interesting because milan, there is an erotic sentiment being expressed here. Milan is union, but it also means concealment, to hide within. So if we read it that way, Kabir Ji is saying that I adorn myself for the sake of union with the beloved, but I could not find the source of life that is concealed within my mind and body. Harna mile jagjeevan gosain. Jagjeevan, the source of life, the giver of life. It's concealed. If you recall, in the previous Shabad, he made a similar statement about Allah being ghaib, concealed. So we can see that the same strand of thinking is continuing here, except that Kabir Ji, versatile as he is, genius, is using now a feminine trope, the bride. So here, the bride that is unsuccessful in attracting its husband is also referred to in Gurbani as duhagan, as opposed to a suhagan. So a duhagan is a symbol for a manmukh, ego mind. So here is the key, that the ego mind tries all kinds of rituals and practices, because this is being spoken in a religious perspective. The gist of all of this is that I, the ego mind, am going through all manner of spiritual practice. I attend retreats, I perform my rituals, I do my nitnem, I do all of these things and more, and yet I have not been successful in finding the har. All of my efforts are to no avail. And we will see as we proceed how Kabirji essentially unpacks what the problem is and how it is to be resolved. But before we go there, to the Rahau Pankti, which is where we should reflect a little. He says, Har mero pir, how har ki bahuriya, Ram bade, main tanak lahoriya, Rahau. Har mero pir. Pir, vada. A husband, Hasam. Someone on whom you rely and support for your existence. That is your pir. And he says, Har mero pir, the har is my husband. How har ki bahuriya, I am the har self's bride. Ram bade, main tanak lahuriya. Ram is all pervasive, omniscient and mighty. But I am a speck and weak. So this is giving us an insight into why our efforts, or as Kabirji says, why my efforts have been unsuccessful, or at any rate, non-productive, because we haven't understood that the relationship between the har, that beloved that we wish to find and seek union with, our relationship with that har is that of husband and wife. And in the cultural context of Kabir's times, and perhaps even today, the context is that the wife is supposed to be obedient to the husband. So if you take that symbolism and apply it to the ego, it implies that the ego mind, Lahuriya, has to submit to Ram, who is the Bade. Lahuriya is a very interesting word. It comes from Lagu. Lagu means light. Light in the sense of weight. Lightweight. A speck. And so it is used as a contrast to the Guru, who is Bada, heavy. Heavy with virtue. So if you wish to successfully find the source of your life, to connect with the source, which is the goal of Gurmat, then you have to understand what your relationship with that source is. The source is the master, you are the disciple. So you have to submit to what the source wishes you to do. And for that, to understand that, you need the Guru. The Guru, Gurbani, will tell you what you have to do. And Gurbani, in fact, is telling us how to adorn yourself. At another place in Gurbani, it says, Pirke sej rahe rang rati, a-sabad-a-day banaraya. A-sabad-a-day banaraya. Safal janam jina satgur paya, duja pao gur sabad jalaya. So this is what Kabirji is saying. Pirke sehaj rahe rang rati. Sehaj, naturally connect with the Sabad, Guru, and adorn yourself with gun, qualities. So you see, the makeup that you should have done was the makeup of virtue. So the relationship is a very intimate one, but you have to make a commitment and you have to be spiritually pure. Because if you're not pure, if you're not attractive to the har, it will spurn you, just like a bride who is disheveled or does not, doesn't take care of herself, is not going to appeal even physically to her husband. That's the analogy, basically. So you have to be spiritually clean, which means you have to cultivate virtue. And what is virtue? We've talked about it. We will continue to talk about it. You have to develop qualities. That's the first thing. Spiritual purity, which means getting rid of the ego. So without such preparation, through the sabad, the heart remains elusive. That's the key to understand. And then he goes on to explain it further. He says, Tanupir ek sanga basera, sej ek pe milan dohera. Tanupir, tan here is another word for a bride, a wife. It also means rich. Tanupir ek. And then Tanupir ek has several connotations. Ek sanga basera meaning we are on the same bed. We are on the same bed. The soul bride and the husband self exist together in the mind body. They're not separate. They share a bed. Sej ek pe. Par milan dohera. Consummation is difficult. Why? As we just said, the barrier to that union is the ego itself. You are your worst enemy, essentially. You are the barrier to yourself. You have, in fact, created roadblocks for yourself through conditioned habits. Through conditioned habits of doing the same thing over and over again. Seeing the world in the same way. Therefore, there is no scope for any change, for any improvement, for any kind of creative activity, because creation requires that openness. So you see, even though you exist in the same space as the self, as the source, you don't see it because your ego veils it. And this ego, by the way, in another place, Gurbani says, is as thin as the wings of a butterfly. It's a very thin veil. It's like a twilight zone. You know the self is there, and yet you can't awaken it. You touch it sometimes, and other times you don't. So you are the barrier. You have to understand your relationship with the self, which is one of submission. In other words, you have to put your ego aside, and then you become tan suhagan jo piya paave, keh kabir fir janam na aave. Tan suhagan, blessed is that soul bride. Suhagan means whose husband is alive. So here it means tan suhagan, that soul bride, who has awakened the spirit in her, the feminine. Because the feminine is being used not simply to give voice to the feminine principle, meaning the principle of creativity, but also to transcend gender, is to get over this gender identification, serving two purposes here. So blessed is that soul bride. Tana suhagana jo pi pave. Pi comes from piya, beloved, pritam. So who has awakened? Who is awakened to her beloved? Keh kabir fir janam na aave. That soul bride breaks the cycle of samsara, the wheel of birth and death. Now you have to understand this. It means birth and death at multiple levels. And one level is at the level of the conditioning of the mind, because you are producing the same thoughts over and over again. You break that cycle of conditioned thinking. At another level, you understand who you are authentically, that you are actually the source. Therefore, the fear of death, the illusion of death goes away. Because you begin to recognize that death and life are complementary states. They are part of the same cycle. So you break the cycle. Waheguru Ji Ka Khalsa, Waheguru Ji Ki Fateh.